No one inside the towering glass building in the heart of Manhattan could have predicted what was about to unfold. It was supposed to be just another Monday. Coffee cups in hand, suits pressed to perfection, and million-dollar meetings lined up on every floor. The CEO, Richard Holbrook, a billionaire known for his sharp mind and even sharper temper, had just stepped into the boardroom when every screen in the company suddenly went black. Chaos erupted. The company's entire global system, servers, data centers, internal communications, had crashed without warning. Millions were at stake. Clients were already calling. Investors were panicking. And Richard? For the first time in years, he was speechless. "Get IT. Now," he barked, his voice echoing through the silent room. But what no one knew yet was that the person who had saved the entire company wasn't even an employee. He wasn't a programmer. He wasn't even old enough to drive. He was a 10-year-old boy, quiet, curious, and completely invisible to the people in power. Until that moment, before we dive deeper into this journey, take a moment to support this channel. If you enjoy stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. Downstairs in a small, dimly lit janitor's closet, Samuel, one of the building's night janitors, was just finishing his shift. Samuel had worked in that building for 8 years, mopping marble floors that led to millionaires' offices and wiping windows that overlooked fortunes in motion. He never complained. He never spoke unless spoken to. But today he had brought someone with him, his son Elijah, a bright-eyed, soft-spoken boy who loved computers more than anything in the world. Elijah had begged his father to let him tag along that day because school was closed, and he promised to sit quietly in the corner while his dad worked. But when the blackout hit, Elijah's attention snapped to the hallway screen as error codes flashed briefly before dying out. He squinted. Something about those numbers looked familiar. Meanwhile, upstairs, the IT team was scrambling. "It's not just a power issue," one technician stammered, sweat dripping from his forehead. "It's a total system breach. Our backup servers aren't responding either." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "How could this happen? We're worth billions. This system cost more than some people's entire lives." But no amount of money was fixing it. Not yet. Every second that ticked by meant lost wealth, collapsing deals, and furious investors breathing down Richard's neck. The board members started whispering. Was this the beginning of a massive downfall? Could the company's entire empire crumble in a single morning? Back in the maintenance hallway, Elijah tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, I think I can help." Samuel looked down, confused. "Elijah, stay put. This isn't the time." But Elijah's voice grew more urgent. "I know those codes. I've seen them before in a simulation I built." Samuel hesitated. What was he supposed to do? Walk his 10-year-old son into the top floor of one of the richest companies in the world and say, "My kid can fix it"? It sounded insane. And yet in Elijah's eyes, there was something steady. "Certain." "Okay," Samuel whispered. "Let's try." And that's when everything started to change. As the elevator doors closed behind them, neither of them knew that what was about to happen would be talked about for years. Because sometimes, brilliance hides in the most unexpected places. Just as the elevator dinged on the top floor, Richard screamed, "We need a miracle." And that's exactly what was about to walk through his door. As the elevator doors slid open, Samuel stepped out first, gripping Elijah's small hand tightly. The hallway was filled with tension. Suits rushed past, phones rang off the hook, and everywhere people whispered about millions vanishing by the minute. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him like never before. Samuel approached the front desk, clearing his throat. I need to speak to someone from IT, or the CO. The receptionist barely glanced up. "Sir, this is not the time for maintenance requests. The system's down. We're in crisis mode." Samuel tried again, his voice trembling. "My son, he thinks he can help." The receptionist blinked, now fully lifting her head to look at the small boy beside him. For a split second, she wanted to laugh, but something about Elijah's serious expression stopped her. Before she could answer, a voice roared from down the hall. "Who's causing more noise out there?" It was Richard. His face was flushed red with frustration, his expensive suit wrinkled from pacing. When he laid eyes on Samuel and Elijah, he scoffed. "What is this? Bring a child to work day? Get them out of here. Samuel stood his ground, voice firmer this time. Sir, please. My boy knows something about these codes. Just give him 5 minutes. Richard opened his mouth to refuse, but before the words came out, one of the IT managers appeared at his side. Sir, with all due respect, we've tried everything. And I mean everything. Maybe we should let the kid try. What's the worst that could happen? Richard glared at both of them, but finally waved his hand in defeat. Fine. 5 minutes. If this turns into a joke, you're both fired. The room Elijah was led into felt enormous. Screens lined the walls, all dark or blinking with error messages. The smell of overheated servers filled the air. Technicians stepped aside, giving him nervous glances. Elijah walked straight to the main terminal, pulling a small USB drive from his pocket, a project he'd been working on at home for weeks. Samuel's eyes widened. Where did you get that? Elijah whispered, I made it. For fun. With trembling fingers but laser focus in his eyes, he plugged it in and began typing. The room fell silent. Lines of code started to appear. His little fingers moved fast, more confident with each keystroke. One IT guy muttered under his breath, Is he reverse engineering the firewall breach? Elijah didn't look up. The attack was a recursive loop. Whoever did this masked the source code. But I've seen this kind of pattern before on a gaming server. It's like a puzzle that keeps resetting itself. Richard crossed his arms, watching with disbelief as the boy typed lines of code that none of his six-figure engineers had thought to try. The room held its breath as Elijah hit enter. For 2 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then one by one, the monitors flickered. Data streams reappeared. The servers began rebooting. Emails flooded back in. Client accounts restored themselves. The entire billion-dollar system was back online. Everyone froze. It was like witnessing a miracle. Richard stared at the screens, then at Elijah, then back at the screens again. Who are you? He asked, his voice low, almost trembling. Elijah finally turned around, shy but proud. I'm just Samuel's kid. Before anyone could respond, the phone lines started ringing again, this time with clients calling to thank them for fixing the issue. The IT team burst into cheers. Some even clapped Elijah on the back. But amidst the celebration, Richard stood frozen, staring at the boy. As the cheers continued to echo through the room, Richard slowly walked over to Elijah, lowering himself to the boy's eye level. For a CEO who spent most of his life commanding boardrooms and negotiating billion-dollar deals, this was uncharted territory. You just saved this company, he said, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. Elijah shifted nervously, glancing at his father, who stood at the doorway, looking equally stunned and proud. Richard took a deep breath, trying to process what had just happened. The company's reputation, its wealth, and millions in client money had all been dangling on the edge of a cliff just minutes ago. And now, thanks to a 10-year-old boy, it was saved. What do you want, kid? Richard finally asked. Anything. Name it. Money? A scholarship? Computers? I'll make it happen. The room fell silent again. Everyone leaned in, waiting for Elijah's answer. The boy bit his lip, thinking for a moment. I don't want money, he said softly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. In a world where wealth was everything, this boy had just turned down a fortune without blinking. Richard raised an eyebrow. No money? Not even a little? Elijah shook his head. I want to visit your data center and maybe get a mentorship. Learn how this all works for real. The IT team exchanged glances, some smiling, some in awe. Richard stood up, laughing under his breath. You're turning down money to learn? He looked over at Samuel. You're raising one interesting kid, you know that? Samuel, still trying to wrap his mind around everything, nodded. He's always been like this, always curious, always dreaming bigger than we can afford. Richard's expression softened for the first time that day. For years, he had surrounded himself with people obsessed with status, fortune, and luxury. Yet here was this kid from a janitor's family, asking not for wealth, but for knowledge. It was humbling. He turned to his assistant. Get HR on the line and call legal. I want a fast-track mentorship program set up for this boy. Full clearance. Starting tomorrow. The IT department erupted into applause again. Some even started chanting Elijah's name. But as the celebration grew louder, Samuel gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did something incredible today, son. Something no amount of money could have bought." Elijah smiled shyly, absorbing the moment, but already thinking about all the systems and codes he was about to learn next. Richard leaned back against his desk, letting out a long sigh. "You know," he said, addressing the whole room, "I spent years thinking that money solved every problem, that throwing cash at an issue would make it disappear." He looked directly at Elijah. "But today a 10-year-old kid with no fortune saved my billion-dollar empire." Everyone laughed, but there was a strange emotion behind Richard's words. Almost gratitude? Maybe even respect? For a CEO who rarely showed emotion. This was a moment no one would forget. As the team slowly returned to their stations, rebooting the final systems and contacting clients, Richard remained standing by the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. For the first time in a long, he felt hope. As the sun began to set over Manhattan, casting golden reflections across the glass towers, the atmosphere inside the office had completely transformed. What had started as a day of panic and potential financial ruin had now become a story that employees would tell for years. Downstairs in the maintenance area, where Samuel usually finished his shifts unnoticed, people were now gathering, patting him on the back, shaking his hand, and congratulating him as if he were a hero too. Samuel wasn't used to this kind of attention. For years, he had walked those hallways invisible to the rich, cleaning the footsteps of millionaires without anyone learning his name. But now people knew exactly who Samuel was, and more importantly, they knew Elijah. Meanwhile, upstairs, Richard called an emergency board meeting, not to discuss losses or damages, but to formally announce something no one expected. As the directors gathered, murmuring about the day's events, Richard stood at the head of the table, holding up a copy of Elijah's debug script printed on paper. "Gentlemen," he started, scanning the room, "today we were saved not by our infrastructure, not by our billion-dollar security software, but by a boy who wasn't even on our payroll." The room fell silent. "We spend millions every quarter on IT security. We hire the best minds money can buy. And yet, in our darkest hour, the solution didn't come from wealth or experience. It came from curiosity, from raw talent, from unexpected places." One of the older board members scoffed. "So what now? Are you suggesting we hire school kids as consultants?" The room chuckled, but Richard didn't smile. "What I'm suggesting," he said sharply, "is that we stop underestimating people based on their title or their paycheck or their background." There was a pause. "And starting tomorrow, we're launching a community mentorship program. Scholarships, internships, coding camps for underprivileged kids. This company will invest not just in technology, but in human potential. Because if there's one thing today taught me, it's that brilliance doesn't care how much money you have." As the meeting wrapped, word of the new program spread through the building like wildfire. Employees were inspired. Emails flooded HR from people wanting to volunteer as mentors. Social media started buzzing as rumors about the janitor's kid who saved $1 billion company leaked onto local news feeds. Samuel's phone rang nonstop with calls from distant relatives, old friends, and even reporters. And Elijah? He sat quietly in a corner of the IT department, wearing an oversized company t-shirt one of the engineers had given him, exploring the company's internal network, with supervision, of course. Every now and then, an employee would pass by, ruffle his hair, or offer him a high five. Elijah smiled, but deep down he was already thinking about his next project. Later that evening, as the building emptied and the city lights flickered on, Richard found himself standing at the ground floor lobby, waiting for his driver. He spotted Samuel and Elijah exiting the maintenance area, heading toward the subway entrance. For a brief moment, Richard hesitated. Then, almost against his usual instincts, he walked over. "Samuel," he called out. Both father and son turned. Richard knelt beside Elijah, lowering his voice. "You're welcome here anytime. This company, this fortune, it owes you more than you know." Elijah beamed, giving a small, proud nod. Samuel, overwhelmed, simply said, "Thank you, sir." As they disappeared into the bustling streets, Richard stood there for a moment longer, smiling to himself. For the following morning, the company's social media accounts exploded. News outlets picked up the story. Billion-dollar company saved by janitor's 10-year-old son. Headlines flashed across business websites, tech forums, and even mainstream morning shows. Clips of the building, photos of Elijah smiling shyly with the IT team, and interviews with staff who witnessed the moment started circulating everywhere. People from around the world commented. Parents saying they were inspired, programmers applauding Elijah's skills, and even celebrities tweeting their admiration. The words rich, $1 million, and fortune kept showing up in every post. Overnight, Elijah had become a symbol, not just of talent, but of hope. Samuel, on the other hand, felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Reporters were now camping outside their small apartment building in the Bronx, eager for a glimpse of the boy genius who saved a billionaire's empire. Back at the office, Richard called a private meeting with his executive team. He stood by the large window overlooking the city, sipping his coffee, deep in thought. "I want to do more," he said, finally turning around. "This can't just be a one-day story. We're sitting on millions, no billions. What's the point of all this money if we're not using it to find more kids like Elijah?" The executives nodded, but one of them raised a concern. "Sir, there's something you should know. We did some digging. Elijah's been coding since he was 6. Self-taught. No formal training. Just pure drive." Richard smiled at that. Exactly the kind of person we need around here. He paused for a second. "Reach out to their family. I want to set up a full scholarship fund for Elijah, and any kid like him in the city who shows that kind of potential." Meanwhile, Samuel sat on the couch at home, holding an envelope that had just been delivered by courier. Inside was a handwritten letter from Richard himself, a rarity, considering most of Richard's communications were cold corporate emails. The letter thanked Samuel for raising a boy with such remarkable talent and resilience. It also included a personal invitation. Elijah was to come back to the company headquarters the following week for an official award ceremony. Plus, there was something else inside the envelope, a check. Enough money to clear Samuel's debts and cover a year's worth of rent. Samuel's hands trembled as he read the amount. For a man who had spent years worrying about bills and scraping together every dollar just to make ends meet, this gesture meant more than words could explain. When Elijah came home from school later that day, Samuel showed him the letter. The boy's eyes lit up, but instead of asking about the money, he focused on something else. "Dad, does this mean I get to go back and see the servers again?" Samuel laughed, tears welling up in his eyes. "Yeah, son, it means exactly that." In the days that followed, Elijah prepared a small speech for the ceremony. With the help of one of the IT managers, he wrote down what he wanted to say. A message about believing in yourself, staying curious, and never letting your circumstances define your future. The media was already calling it the feel-good story of the year. For Samuel and Elijah, it felt like the beginning of a brand new chapter. One built not on money or status, but on dreams, determination, and unexpected opportunities that sometimes come disguised as disasters. The day of the ceremony arrived, and the company's grand auditorium was packed. Rows of employees filled the seats, alongside invited guests, local journalists, and even city officials. A large banner hung across the stage, celebrating brilliance beyond titles. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Employees who had barely noticed Samuel in the hallways before were now clapping as he entered with Elijah by his side. Both wore new clothes provided by the company. Elijah wore a crisp button-down shirt, and Samuel, for the first time in years, had traded his janitor's uniform for a tailored suit. As they walked down the aisle, people smiled, waved, and some even stood to applaud. The feeling was surreal. Just days ago, Samuel was invisible. Now he was the father of the boy who saved a billionaire's fortune. Richard stood backstage, adjusting his tie, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: nervousness. This wasn't just another investor pitch or corporate earnings call. This was personal. As he stepped onto the stage, the applause grew louder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice steady but emotional, "we're here today because sometimes it takes more than money, more than wealth, and more than corporate strategies to solve a crisis. It takes heart. It takes vision. It takes a 10-year-old boy with a laptop and a dream." The audience laughed warmly. Richard continued, "Elijah, please join me on stage." Elijah's heart raced as he walked to the front. Cameras flashed, and the sound of clapping filled his ears. Standing beside Richard, he gripped the sides of the podium, glanced nervously at the crowd, then began to speak. I didn't know this would happen, he said softly. When I saw the error codes, I wanted to help. I love computers. I love solving puzzles. And I guess I just did what I could. The room went silent, everyone hanging on to his every word. I want to say thank you to my dad for believing in me, and to everyone here for giving me a chance. Samuel wiped away a tear as the crowd gave his son a standing ovation. After the applause died down, Richard took the microphone again. From this day forward, he announced, Elijah has a standing invitation here. Our doors are open to him. And we're launching the Elijah Initiative, a company-funded program designed to find and mentor kids from all backgrounds who show exceptional potential in technology and innovation. The announcement brought another wave of cheers. Richard smiled, then leaned toward Elijah. And by the way, there's a little something else. 2 assistants rolled out a brand new state-of-the-art computer setup, complete with high-end monitors, software licenses, and access to online tech courses. Elijah's jaw dropped. For a boy who had been learning coding on a second-hand laptop with a cracked screen, this was like being handed a treasure chest. Back in their apartment that evening, Elijah sat cross-legged on the floor, setting up his new equipment while Samuel watched from the kitchen, still processing the whirlwind of the last few days. The phone rang again. This time, it was a local university offering Elijah a place in a special accelerated STEM program for gifted youth. Samuel laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. From mopping floors to mentoring millionaires, he whispered to himself. Elijah grinned from across the room. Dad, this is just the beginning, right? Samuel smiled back, full of pride. Yes, and it really is. Days turned into weeks, and Elijah's story continued to spread far beyond the walls of the company. National news channels picked it up. Tech blogs featured detailed articles about the boy genius from the Bronx, and even international outlets began sharing the inspiring tale. Talk shows invited Elijah and Samuel for interviews, and everywhere they went, people wanted to shake their hands, take pictures, and hear every detail of that unforgettable day. Donations started pouring into local community centers in their neighborhood, and organizations that had never cared before were suddenly funding STEM programs for underprivileged kids. The words wealth, fortune, and million-dollar company kept appearing in every headline. But for Samuel and Elijah, the real fortune wasn't about the money. It was about the opportunities that kept unfolding. At the company, Elijah became something of a legend. Every time he visited the building, employees would stop what they were doing just to greet him. The IT department created a special workstation just for him, labeled Elijah's Lab, filled with tools and learning resources. Engineers often found themselves asking the boy for his opinion on troubleshooting problems. And to everyone's surprise, he usually had better ideas than most of them. One afternoon, Richard invited Samuel and Elijah to his private office on the top floor, a space that had always symbolized power and authority. Samuel looked around, clearly overwhelmed by the view, the expensive furniture, and the art that probably cost more than his entire apartment. Richard gestured for them to sit. I've been thinking a lot, he began, leaning forward. This company has always been about numbers, revenue, profits, but lately, I've realized that real value comes from people, from talent like Elijah's, from dedication like yours, Samuel. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. That's why I want to offer you a new position, Samuel. Facilities manager. Better pay. Full benefits. No more night shifts. You've earned it. Samuel's eyes widened. For years, he had dreamed of a better life for his family. But opportunities like this had always felt out of reach. Now, one of the richest men in the city was offering him a future he never thought possible. Samuel's voice cracked as he answered, thank you, sir. This means more than you'll ever know. Before they left, Richard turned to Elijah. And I want you to know, this company's door will always be open for you. Whether you want an internship, a job, or even just a place to hang out and learn, you've proven you're worth more than any resume or job title. Elijah smiled wide, feeling a sense of pride and belonging that he had never felt before. As they rode the elevator back down, Samuel looked at his son and said, You changed our lives, Elijah. You really did. Elijah, clutching a small company badge they had given him as a keepsake, responded with a grin. And this is just the start, Dad. Just wait and see. Weeks later, as the company prepared for its annual shareholders meeting, Richard stood before a crowd larger than he'd ever addressed. Investors, board members, and media representatives packed the room, expecting updates on quarterly profits and future business strategies. But this year, Richard had something different planned. As he stepped up to the microphone, he scanned the faces before him and smiled slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we're here today to talk about wealth, about fortune, about what makes a company truly valuable." The room grew quiet. Yes, this company is worth billions. Yes, we recovered from one of the biggest IT disasters in our history. But today, I want to tell you about how a 10-year-old boy, someone who didn't have money, didn't have status, and didn't even have a desk here, saved it all. Gasps and murmurs spread across the crowd. Richard continued, "Some of you may have seen the news reports. Others may have doubted the story. But I assure you every word is true. Elijah taught us that true wealth isn't just found in bank accounts or quarterly earnings. It's found in people, in unexpected places, in moments where heart and talent shine brighter than any dollar sign." Applause broke out across the room, investors clapping alongside employees and board members alike. Cameras flashed as Elijah, seated in the front row beside Samuel, blushed and waved shyly when the spotlight turned to him. After the meeting, as the guests filtered out, Richard pulled Samuel aside. "You've raised an extraordinary son," he said, placing a firm hand on Samuel's shoulder. "And I want you to know this isn't charity. This is about recognizing value where others fail to look." Samuel nodded, still overwhelmed by the whirlwind their lives had become. That evening, back in their small apartment, Samuel sat with Elijah at their tiny kitchen table, eating dinner like they always had. But this time, everything felt different. The room felt warmer. The future felt wider. And for the first time in years, Samuel felt like the weight of financial worry had lifted off his shoulders. Elijah pulled out his laptop, his new state-of-the-art machine, and began typing away at his next coding project. Samuel watched him for a moment, smiling. "Proud of you, kiddo," he said softly. Elijah looked up, grinning. "I'm just getting started, Dad." Outside their window, the city lights flickered like a million tiny stars. And somewhere deep in the heart of Manhattan, in a skyscraper built on money, power, and fortune, a CEO sat in his corner office, staring out at the skyline with something new in his heart: gratitude. Gratitude for a janitor, gratitude for a boy, and gratitude for the lesson that no amount of money could ever teach. Sometimes, the greatest solutions come from the most unexpected places. This story reminds us that true value isn't measured by money, titles, or status, but by heart, passion, and the courage to step forward when it matters most. Never underestimate your potential, no matter where you come from. Stay curious, stay driven, and believe that you can create change, even when no one expects it from you. Your ideas, your voice, and your actions can impact lives in ways you've never imagined. Remember, greatness doesn't require fortune. It starts with belief. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and tell us in the comments what part of Elijah's journey moved you the most. There's another story waiting for you, and it might just change the way you see the world.